Thanks for turning on the recording. Brianne.
Good evening, everybody. My name is Brianne Golding, and I am a city planner and CPED for the city of Minneapolis.
Thank you. Thanks for being here. Jen.
Hi, everyone. I'm Jen Garman. I'm an architect at Cunningham Group, and I'm here because of a personal passion for justice in the built environment, and recently have partnered with Gani Mahal and Pangea World Theater on reimagining their space. So that is why I'm here, excited to hear from you all.
Great, good to see you. Thank you. Ephraim.
Hello, I'm owner and director of Modus Locus Community Space and Gallery in Powderhorn Park. Also, a recent PPNA board member. Interactive and immersive art events are kind of my go-to and thing that I desire to promote the most.
Great, thank you. Sarah Jane.
Good evening, everybody. My name is Sarah Jane. I use she, her pronouns. I work as a public health nurse here in Minneapolis, all throughout kind of like the South Side. I do spend some time over north as well, but I spend most of my time in East Phillips, Powderhorn, and then I live in Central neighborhood. And I work mostly with people experiencing homelessness, specifically unsheltered homelessness. And I raised my kid here and love being a part of this neighborhood.
Wonderful, thank you. Dara.
Hi there, I'm Dara Rudick. My pronouns are she, her. And I've lived in Powderhorn for about 15 years. I'm also a business owner of a downtown Minneapolis business. And I'm currently chairing the Meet Minneapolis Board of Directors, which is the city's Convention and Visitors Association.
Thanks for being here. Louis or Luis, I'm sorry, I'm not sure how you pronounce your first name.
No problem. I prefer Louis, but either way.
Louis, I got two, but not the third. Sorry.
Don't worry about it. You're fine. I mean, just don't take my name in vain and you're good.
I promise. I promise I won't.
All right. So, hey everyone. My name is Louis McCoy. I prefer the he, him pronouns. I'm currently honored to serve as chair of the Powderhorn Park Neighborhood Association. And also very proud to raise my kids here in this neighborhood.
Great, thank you. Kara or Kara.
Thank you. Yes, it's Kara.
Thank you.
And I'm a homeowner in Powderhorn Park, and I've owned a home here for over 30 years. I love this neighborhood. And tonight I'm here as a homeowner, as a mother, grandmother, and also as a business owner. I am also representing the Cultural Wellness Center and Anamkara Therapies and Anamkara House here.
Wonderful, thank you.
Happy to be here. I use she and her pronouns too.
Excellent, thank you. And Shanine or Shanane?
Shanae. Hey
Shanae.
everyone. My name is Shanae Herbert. I am a Powderhorn Neighborhood Association board member for 2 years. And by day, I'm actually the Healing Justice Program Director for American Friends Service Committee. We do anti-racist youth organizing, and we're currently officed in Corcoran Neighborhood Association.
Excellent, thank you. Shannon.
Hello, everyone. Shannon Lemon. I am born and raised South Minneapolis. Had been gone for a long time. Returned to find out our statewide economic disparity gap, and in the midst of COVID and George Floyd, and just really happy to be here. Really committed to the neighborhoods that shape my existence and understanding how important that is. I use she, her pronouns.
Thank you, Shannon. And we have someone here as TS. Taylor, is that you?
Hi, yes, that's me. Sorry, I'm driving. We'll be in front of a computer soon. Hi, my name is Taylor Smikarova, she, her. I am the Director of Property Development at Seward Redesign, which is a community development corporation serving South Minneapolis. And I currently am leading or co-leading the redevelopment of a few different sites near the 3rd precinct, which I won't go into much detail more than that. Thank you. I'm happy to be here.
Great, thank you. I know there are 3 of our partners and colleagues who are helping out on the technical side of things and note-taking tonight. Christina, can you introduce yourself?
Sure. Good evening. I'm Christina Beck, and I'm newly the Communications and Development Coordinator at Powderhorn Park. So I'm here to listen tonight and support.
Thanks, Christina. Angie.
Hello, everybody. My name is Angie McKinley, and as Mary Margaret mentioned, I'm on staff at AIA Minnesota. I'm the Director of Equity, Youth Outreach, and Programs, and I am also here to listen and support.
And Sherry.
Hi, everybody. I'm Sherry Hansen. I use she and her pronouns. I am the Director of Communications, Advocacy, and Public Outreach at AIA Minnesota. I'm very excited to hear this conversation tonight.
Thanks, Sherry. And I see 2 more folks have joined us, I believe. Kim. We're just introducing with name, pronouns, and what organization you are connected to or neighborhood you're connected to that prompted you to join us tonight.
Great, thanks for having me. Kim Miller, she, her pronouns. I work in the diversity, equity, inclusion space, doing a lot of training primarily in that space, but also strategic consulting, and joining as a part of the board with Powderhorn Park Neighborhood Association.
Great, thank you. And Josh.
Hey, everybody, good evening. Sorry for showing up a little late. I am a local architectural designer and have been working on pre-development concept designs for the Gandhi Mahal Pangea World Theater space. And that was through my own studio, Tikkun Collective. And since engaging with the group on that, I've since joined Ryan Companies as a project manager. So happy to be here.
Great, thanks for being here. And Kelly, I'm not sure if you've just joined us recently too. Go ahead.
Nope.
Oh, you just changed it.
And then I figured out I remembered to change the name. So now I'm really me instead of my dog.
Really you. Okay, good. I'm glad.
Was that Elsa the Ice Princess? Is that the name that was previously your iPad?
Yes, but also she was born 4 years before Frozen ever came out. So we would have chosen a different name if we had realized that the Frozen princess would have come along her way.
Oh, that is very fair. Yes. A beautiful name, no matter what. All right. Has anyone else joined us that I've missed? Please jump on in. Okay. All right. Before we get started, we just want to give a little bit more context. You know, the most important context that we are bringing into this is that after the murder of George Floyd, there have been so many conversations, so many people aspiring to something more, places that are racially just and environmentally sound in these areas affecting the unrest. A lot of that work has been in collaboration, but it's also been on parallel tracks. And overall, there's a deeper understanding that's emerging about what hinders and what accelerates the best of what the built environment can be, especially in these particular areas. But what's best in development, especially in Minneapolis and St. Paul, really means different things to different people. People throw around terms like equity and health and sustainability and green. But as a community, we don't have shared definitions of what those ideas are. We don't even have a shared understanding of what we're aiming for. And the more that we understand amongst ourselves what's getting in the way of what we're aiming for and a better defined place to aim for, the greater the potential that those aspirations can become reality. It also seems that over the past year and a half, we've gotten farther and farther away from really dealing with those fundamental issues of systemic racism that led to the unrest, and making a connection between systemic racism and what comes next in the built environment. So to create the best of what's possible, we need to be well grounded in what has been. And just remind ourselves that the unrest was part of a long history of systemic racism and oppression in the Twin Cities and in this nation, and that what happened is not new. We have to learn from those lessons of the past, those cycles of oppression, unrest, and rebuilding, and make the changes needed to keep ourselves from falling back into those same cycles again. We've also heard a lot of people say that fundamental systems level change is needed. But systems are hard to change, and even tweaks and changes at the margins are difficult to achieve, much less fundamental change. It can be hard to see the injustice that may lay beneath a bright, shining new building or a beautiful development plan. We have to work and think differently if we're going to create a truly just and healthy built environment. So just to give you an overview of how that context connects to this session tonight and this effort overall, History, Hurdles, and Hope is the first phase of a broader effort to create shared understanding and a shared multi-sector change agenda. So over the course of these 3 gatherings and follow-up interviews, we are seeking to create shared understanding of the history of development in these areas of Minneapolis and St. Paul, and the cycles of oppression, unrest, and rebuilding that have happened throughout the nation. We want shared understanding of the systems, policies, and beliefs that have both hindered and accelerated healthy, racially equitable, and environmentally just development. We're looking for shared understanding of what you and others have been experiencing as you've worked to both envision and create that better built environment, the hurdles and roadblocks that you've encountered, as well as what has actually made a positive difference on your path. And we want shared understanding, again, of what we're aiming for, the best of what's possible in the development of the built environment and the systems that guide it. So after these 3 sessions and interviews, we're going to convene again to share back what we've learned across the sessions in the form of a change agenda for your review and feedback. And that change agenda is going to focus on those roadblocks to be removed and those bright spots to be leveraged in order to achieve the best of what's possible. And again, it will be a multi-sector change agenda. So the changes that we need to see in the systems, policies, and everyday work of governments, businesses, nonprofits, and grant makers. And then the learnings from those sessions and that draft multi-sector change agenda is going to be shared through community meetings and multimedia communications to continue to build and augment that work and grow the number of people who are calling for action. The outcomes of your work tonight and over the next few sessions are not going to be held close. They are going to be spread far and wide, and in a way that's designed and communicated to inspire that hope and that purpose and action that we're all longing for. As we work together, we're going to be keeping that end goal of creating and achieving a multi-sector change agenda in our minds. We're going to be taking notes and recording the sessions, not just to document the big ideas, but we also want to glean the ways that you communicate those ideas, the words that you use. We need new and better language around development that moves people to see the streets and buildings and common spaces of the built environment as their own. The people most affected by the murder of George Floyd, the people most harmed by racism, are more than stakeholders. They and you have been witnesses, they've been healers, have been first responders, have been keepers of the light of aspiration, and they can be owners of the vision, the process, the outcomes, and the economic benefits of the structures and spaces that are created here. We know that this is a relatively small group that we've gathered tonight, and that that you don't and you can't be expected to represent other people while you are here. We also know that there are others who would ideally be here too. Because of competing priorities for people's time, there are a number of people who are interested in these sessions but not able to attend in person. There are also some people whose contact information was very hard for us to find. And there are surely others who were not invited who should have been. People who have made known their goals of racial equity and environmental justice in the development of these areas affected in the unrest, whose experiences and insights should inform this work, but were overlooked by or not known to the organizers of these sessions. And this is where we could use your help. If there is a person or an organization that you should be involved, you think should be involved in informing this multi-sector change agenda in some way, please let us know. I'll put our colleague Christina Beck's email information in the chat. You received the invitation from her, and we ask that you reach out to her with anyone who you think should be added to this circle of folks who are contributing to this work. So again, with all of those people in mind, we're recording these sessions really so that they have a chance to watch them and have context for their engagement going forward. I have one very last note before we get started. We know this is an evening session during a time when you or your loved ones may be needing to eat some dinner. You may also need to step away for a few minutes over the course of our time together for another reason. That is perfectly fine. We encourage you to do that. Take the time if and when you need it at any point along the way. With that lengthy overview, I am excited to turn it over to my partners, collaborators, Paul Bach and Tabitha Montgomery. Paul, are you ready to start us off?
I'm ready.
All right. Thank you.
All right. Well, thank you and good evening, everybody. And Mary Margaret, thank you for that great overview. Again, I'm Paul Bach, he, him pronouns. And as Mary Margaret said, I wear a lot of hats, and I'm just going to leave it at that. Tonight, what I'm going to try to do is kind of contextualize how we got here, and doing that by talking about history, and particularly our relationship to land, how we see land in the United States, what it means, and what that connection is to racism, equity, etc. And also to continue to position this as about place. Place is the intersection of spiritual, cultural, physical, economic, and human systems. And, you know, everything happens in a place. And also to remind everyone that we're doing this because we're looking for collective impact. Systems are hard to change, yes, but if we're all working on our part of that system's change, we can make that happen. So whatever lane you're in on the revolutionary superhighway, you know, that's where we want you to do your work, right? You know, we all have our different roles. So having said that, I'm going to get started. Apologies to my wife because she's probably heard most of this before. So if she steps away, it's because, you know, she talks to me all the time about this. All right, so I'm going to talk about land, right? Because, you know, the built environment, you know, it occupies space, it occupies land. We have to remember in the United States, you know, here that land, once the colonizers arrived, you know, became a tool for injustice. Once the colonizers arrived and from a conquest, because that's what they were doing, they came to say, hey, we're claiming this land, even though it is someone else's, the indigenous populations, for someone else, thinking about how can we build more wealth and power by occupying this land, by developing it and monetizing it. And since that time, that has been the way land has been thought of as a way to build wealth and power. And it's also been clearly articulated in our history, who deserves to own land, who deserves to develop it, who should value it more. And most of the time, that is not people of color who have been allowed to do that. So we have to think about that from how we start and we see these things and how that's baked into the DNA of how we see the work that gets done. So thinking about that, you know, once the colonizers got established and started to work and, you know, went on thinking about how they monetize the natural landscape, you know, kind of at any cost, you know, that leads directly to, well, how do we get the most out of this and who's going to do it for the least, which in the United States really leads to how we get to slavery, because like, okay, we need a lot of land to produce these commodities and we don't want to pay a lot for the labor. The best way to do that is slavery. So we have to remember that slavery is the foundation of the modern American capitalism. You can't get around that. Because slavery led to the economic dominance of the United States worldwide. Just a short fact about that. In 1850, there were 3.2 million slaves in the country and they had a market value of $1.3 billion. So that is the foundation of our modern capitalist system. We always have to remember that capitalism is about the haves and the have-nots. You know, that's what capitalism is based on. As we think about how the built environment gets developed, we're working in a capitalist environment. So the legacy of all of that is that, you know, slaves were the cogs of the system, not the drivers. They weren't permitted to own any assets or benefit from their labor. That included owning land. And even free Black people at that time were also extremely constrained in their ability to take care of themselves, to have economic mobility, participate in the economy, and they weren't really allowed to own land either. It was very rare. So in a country that is built on how you own land, even now as we talk about housing, you know, do you own a house, how you build wealth, like we started from, okay, there's a huge part of the population that's like, no, you don't get to participate in that. So as we move along, you know, we get to the Emancipation Proclamation, we got the end of the Civil War, we're going into Reconstruction, you know, okay, it's great, you know, there's a brief period of time where Black people are seeing, you know, amazing freedom, you know, they're elected to office, you know, all these things are going on. Well, while all this is going on, clearly, you know, a backlash is building in terms of we can't let this go on, because particularly in the South, that's going to jeopardize the whole reality of how the economy works. Now, if you all remember from history, you know, General Sherman said, you know, we're going to give all the slaves 40 acres and a mule, which basically amounted to about 400,000 acres of land at that point in time, which was really a reparations strategy, because really the way people existed was to farm land. They could be subsistence farmers, but, you know, not having land was really a problem because we were mostly a rural country, and particularly in the South. However, Lincoln was assassinated. Andrew Johnson decided, no, we don't want to do that. And so he rescinded that order. That is the basis of a huge shift in power and wealth. The value of that land that Black people did not get, by some estimates today, is about $640 trillion. I'm going to say that again, $640 trillion that people did not receive, could not build on, could not build a legacy on. It also really cemented this idea that, you know, you couldn't exist, particularly in the South, without having to share crop or, you know, work on land you didn't own and be in this perpetual relationship to white supremacy in terms of your whole existence, right? So we continue to see that land is valued, it's used, it's valued for a certain group. Things are built on it by other people, including the White House built by slaves. We don't have time to go into that tonight. But that this is the way we have used land and we've seen land. And in communities, we continue to have that legacy. So, you know, as we continue to go on, you know, we continue to have this inequity. And if we think about wealth and power, you know, in 1863, right after the Emancipation Proclamation was signed, the Black community owned less than 1% of the United States wealth, right? So that's 1863. 150 years later, that percentage has barely moved. And Mary Margaret talked earlier about, you know, racism, systemic, institutional, systems change. You know, you can't exist without having any resources. And there are all kinds of resources. And so, right, there are cultural resources, there's spiritual resources, there's social connections, there are all that. But, you know, if you don't have any monetary resources, it's hard to do things. So we can't ignore the fact that communities of color, Indigenous communities have not been able to participate in that work, in that business, in order to have land. So now we move to a huge opportunity, and that has direct impact in Minnesota, which is the 1862 Homestead Act. This is an act signed by President Lincoln that you could get 160 acres of land for free, basically just by filing some paperwork and spending a small filing fee. Most of that land was in the West and the Midwest. Now, it's not a coincidence that most of that land was also about how do we expand territory and how do we also push Indigenous folks off of their land and onto reservations. You know, that went hand in hand. That's not a coincidence that happened. At that point in time, you know, North Dakota, South Dakota, Montana, here, at the end of this whole Homestead Act, 246 million acres of Western land was given away, which was about 10% of all the land in the entire US, right? So that's incredible that 10% of the entire public land in the US was given away basically for free to folks. And what they had to do is establish a homestead, farm it. All right, pretty much 1.6 million white families benefited from the program and about 6,000 Black families. Now, when this was signed, Black people were not prohibited from in the spirit of the law. But in terms of institutional and systemic racism, that didn't work. So 6,000 Black families were able to get land. In Minnesota, in the first 3 years, about 75,000 people claimed land. And that continued to push the Dakota off of their tribal homelands. And the benefit, if we think about the impact of the Homestead Act, 93 million Americans living today are descendants of homesteaders. So probably a lot of you folks on this call are descendants of homesteaders because lots of European immigrants came to the United States to participate in the Homestead Act to get their 160 acres of free land and establish new towns, territories, etc. So this is like a massive transfer of wealth, a huge transfer of wealth that went on that the government supported system-wide, designed to disenfranchise BIPOC communities and enfranchise the white communities in terms of what they wanted to do, which really was, to build infrastructure, to get property taxes. I mean, to use land to grow, right? So once we get through that, we get through Reconstruction. We which is followed by Jim Crow, which is state-sanctioned terrorism and white supremacy. Here we really see how policy and laws really impact where people can go, where they go to school, recreate, eat, shop, and all of these things are created in the built environment. Where you live, which neighborhood, do you have a paved street? Do you have a sewer system? Are you forced to live in a neighborhood that's by a dump? All of those things are implemented through the built environment. And so policies about racism, all that. So all of that in the South then spurred the next big kind of movement. And as we're moving towards getting kind of done with this history piece this week is, that pushed us to get to the Great Migration, right? So now we have this significant number of African Americans, about 6 million between 1910 and the 1970s, moving from the rural South to urban cities in the Northeast, Midwest, and the West, right? And so they move mostly for, economic conditions. And yes, you could make more money working in a steel mill than you could, picking cotton. However, this is this is where we see, the incredible amount of tenements, contracts for deed, segregation of land, all that, being exploited. And then that really, as we get later, drives how we get to how we saw massive high-rise public housing. All of that is part of this big shift. Again, all of this work is interwoven in real estate, in building, in the owning of selling of land, in the profiting of it, who controls it, where people get to live. All that is in our DNA as we think about how our communities have been defined, historically, and who controls why they look the way they do, where people live, et cetera. So, when we're in this point in time, and as we're moving towards what we're going to explore tomorrow, we talk about racism, redlining, de jure segregation, the building of the suburbs, and we'll be in the period where we're in Motown, and so we can talk more about the Four Tops and the Supremes, the way we started the beginning of this. But these are the pillars of how the built environment has been planned and created. And if we want to change it, we have to understand, where it started. And I'd even talk about, the intricacies of the finance institutions and banking and where they all intersect in this work, which is really important to understand too, because you can't build anything if you don't have any money. And if you get in a room with some developers, whatever, and you start saying, I want to do this, sooner or later, you're going to get down to, well, where's the money, right? So what's valued to be financed, how we see finance, who controls finance, is also an incredible part of the story and the legacy. So that's just a little bit of trying to put in this context about the history of land and people and who gets to have land, who doesn't, how that's used, and how that is going to continue to contribute to how we do our work going forward.
Thanks, Paul. And so I'm going to play a very small role. I think Mary Margaret oversold my part. I'm going to launch a poll, and I'm going to try to tease out some commentary. And the truth of it is, we know it's been a long day. So grateful and appreciative that you guys said yes to 2.5 hours in one setting. So you can share your feedback in a couple of ways. You can drop it in the chat if something came up for you. You don't have to feel like you have to add your voice to this space, as we acknowledge that you're probably multitasking or doing some other things. But this is fairly informal. So if you want to come off mute and you have something that came up for you in terms of what Paul shared, that would be great. Again, I know he started with the light stuff, all the warm and fuzzy stuff. So no pressure. And then I'm going to give people a moment to think about that. And I'm going to go ahead and launch the poll. And I'm going to acknowledge too that it may not be perfect in terms of how it's framed or positioned, but it's an attempt to kind of get us thinking about what we heard. So I'm going to try to leave this open here for, let's call it 30 seconds-ish, and an attempt for you kind of what your immediately comes up for you and some of the things that you heard. So I'm going to give it maybe another 15 seconds if everyone wants to go ahead and kind of digest that question and respond. That would be great. We're almost there with 100% participation. All right, going once, going twice, sold. And so I'm going to go ahead and share the results. So I think everyone should be able to see this on the screen now, but pretty telling. I'm sure it could have been difficult for many of you to choose one, but Native American genocide and slavery, over 50% of us believe that that's kind of the leading factor, the leading contributing factor in terms of how we were formed as a country, as these United States. And I know that there were some comments in the chat. I'm just going to encourage folks to kind of take those in. A lot of that was kind of appreciation for the rundown of all of the information that Paul shared. So again, thank you, Paul. But I think that sometimes when we're not in school for too long, we can kind of forget some of the things from a historical perspective that was taught, or even, dare I say, partially taught, whether it be Reconstruction, the Homestead Act, just significant points in time that just at some point become so woven into our truth that we don't really spend a lot of time reflecting on it. So appreciation for that tee up, Paul, and I'm going to turn it back to you unless anyone else has anything else that they want to mention. Oh, looks like Louis dropped in, not to mention the GI Bill. Absolutely. So just different markers in time in terms of how we've gotten to this particular place when it comes to the manifestation of what we see in our communities or what we don't see in our communities. Cara shared the Dakota War of 1862. Truly, so I think that what's sobering, which, you know, it's part of our work as community leaders and partners and developers and wanting to see equitable change in our community. I think it's just sobering how much history we have and how great an impact that history continues to have on our day-to-day experience, which sometimes is just kind of always, I think, a little bit hard to hold as we're trying to make difference and do different in a way that serves more people and serve those who have not benefited from a lot of the, and I think that, and I hate to do, well, I don't hate to do it, but one of the things that struck me, just PS, and by the way, is how cavalierly Paul was like, yeah, you know, a form of terrorism and white supremacy. I'm like, well, hey, yes, and that's a lot. Just even that sentence or statement is a lot, but in the context of policies and systems that have been put in place, that's a real sentiment and a belief by many people. So I'm going to turn it back over to Paul to take us into 1.0, unless Paul has anything else follow up to add in terms of history, but to move us into hurdles. And then we'll do the same thing with kind of our hope segment for tonight.
Okay, thank you, Tabitha. And you know, no one ever oversells you. Come on. So we're going to go to hurdles, and I think, you know, I think one of the things that's hard, and that poll was really telling, and yeah, I had a hard time picking only one, but that how often, if you get in a room, all of you are working in these, and you get in a room and you're talking about equitable, whatever, do you start with slavery and the genocide of Indigenous people? Now, I talk about this all the time, right? It's very rarely that's where we start. There's a lot of things we start that are maybe about the results of that or the continuation, you know, of policies, but it's very rarely that we start with that kind of grounding. And you know, sometimes people, you know, it's hard, and Tabitha, is correct in that statement, but that if we don't remember that, and that we are working on something that is very deep and rooted, unfortunately, in how things happen, it's hard to grasp the scale and to make that change. So that's one of the things I think is that, for us to remember that, like how we got here is really important. And so then I think, not thinking systemically is one of the things. And, as an architect, when we build a building, like we think about all the systems that go there. We don't not think about heating and cooling, and only think about foundations. We think about everything that has to go together as a whole, right? When we're doing this work, we have to think about all the systems and the intersectionality that, is part of the work. And that's a hard thing to do. I'm not saying it's easy, and I think that's also why we need to be more cross-sector in order to do that, so that we have all of that energy, knowledge, and viewpoints at the table while we're trying to do the work. How do we center, racial equity in this work? Whether it's in how we think about real estate capital stacks, whether it's about how we think about who builds the work, or we think about who designs the work. How do we really think about equity? And as Mary Margaret said, how do we we start to get some understanding of what we mean when we say equity, because we say it all the time. How do we value the fact that community members understand their communities best? How do we support that work, right? I don't understand your community better than you do. You understand it best. I may understand zoning better than you do, but you understand your community better. So how do we make sure that we value the fact that you understand your community and what it needs, and how do we support you in doing that work? I think that's critical. Less focus on outputs and more focus on outcomes. It's easy to count how many units you produced. It's easy to count how many buildings, whatever. But can we really talk about outcomes, and outcomes that create structural change? And that may only be a small thing, and I'm bad at this, because I usually, I want to do the biggest, baddest thing that I can come up with right away, right? And so I have to work on okay, incremental change, is important too. And it's not all one whole swoop at the same time. I really like to think about, that residents, are imagining, designing, owning, and executing the developments in their own neighborhoods, and that we're going to change the power dynamic on how we think about this work, right? And that's, a lot of times when we talk about diversity, equity, inclusion, it's, who's at the table is really discussed, but not whose table it is and who's in charge at the table, right? So who's driving this is critical. More critical, more critical than things that we could check off easily on a list, and way harder to do. How do we really increase the number of BIPOC real estate and design professionals who do the work? Who have the lived experience to relate. How do we really, and this is a big deal, and I don't have an answer, but I think we have to be realistic about that. The way the built environment was, has been imagined is really from an wealth extractive strategy, right? And if we want to get to more equity, and we want to think that, we have to think about how do we do that differently, and what does that look like? But we also have to be realistic about, okay, that's in the DNA of the real estate industry. The real estate industry has benefited, and this is not an indictment on people who work in real estate, but the real estate industry has benefited from inequitable policies and procedures. You can't get away from that, and we have to be real about that. And so that gets into how we do the work we do. And also how when we're thinking about doing this work, that it's not always about the built environment, it's about the people too. So the quote from Andre Perry in his book, about building people, not buildings, right? So we have to do both of those. We have to do both of those, right? And Mary Margaret talked about the shiny object, which is all great, but if you're struggling to put food on the table every day, the shiny object on the corner may not be the best thing that you need. And there is a great article, this is where I'm getting really wonky, but there was a great article by Craig Wilkins about architecture. And he talked about, and he was talking about the Chicago Biennale and the fact that it was all about getting out in the community and this work that was community driven. But he talked about that, working on zoning change or working on a different way to think about the environment was architecture. And it was really powerful. And I'm not doing Craig great justice, and it's in Common Edge, and later on we can put a link in here, but his real focus was, okay, we have to think about this work differently as professionals and as people connected. And this work that had been done was really around that transformation. And, because most of the time when you go to these kinds of events, they're all about shiny things and they're deep and theoretical, and you go, oh, that's nice. But this was really anchored in community and in different ways. So, I think, we have to be really present. We have to really understand where we're going. Community has to be a driver. We have to understand how these things get done, and that's in knowledge. So some people in the community have to understand what AMI is, what a capital stack is, why rate of return is important, and all kinds of other things that people talk about when they're doing a project, right? And then we also have to be willing to push, when it's like, no, it's not right. So you have to be willing to push, in whichever lane you're in. And, when it's your lane, it's time to stand up and push, see something that's not right, say something. I think, that's really important. So overall, for me, it's about understanding where we're at, understanding where we want to go, understanding what these systems and policies are, and being resolute, optimistic around how you can change them.
All right, great. I think that brings us to the end of our second movement about hurdles. And so again, if there's things that came up for people and kind of some of the context setting that and framework and opinion that Paul shared in that regard, please drop it into the chat, or if you want to come off mute, you're really invited and more than welcome to do so. I'm going to launch the next poll just to kind of see what comes up for folks. So just give me 1 second. And again, we're going to take about the same amount of time. So 60 seconds to get your initial reaction to what do we think is the biggest contributing factor to the hurdles that influence our equitable development.
When I think of hurdle, the more recent terminology that I've learned that I didn't think there was a word for is the concept of, it's not generational trauma isn't right. It's like your cells can inherit trauma from ancestors for experiences that you as a living person did not experience. And I am not a religious person. And so the concept of spirits and that is, I have questions, but just this concept of like your physicality, you could have inherited some effect to your physicality just based on being alive and being born with a certain genealogy. And that is from a place that you have no control over. And obviously we don't control our race, but even that amount of like, I literally cannot control the impression that history has had on my like cellular makeup. It was like, what what the heck do I do with that? Like, how do I even overcome something that I don't even know exists and that probably affects so much of how you approach and move through the world, like down to like how you brush your teeth or like how you decide what clothing to wear, you know, things like that that are not life-changing, but that were probably influenced by things that you didn't realize were influencing you, and then compound that over generations, and then compound that for different kinds of people, right? Because I've heard it in terms of inheriting those issues from slavery or ancestral and influences, but everybody has ancestors, and everybody's ancestors made decisions, did great and bad things. So if African Americans might inherit the effects of slavery, then some folks might have inherited the effects of raping and pillaging or mass murder or, you know, being indifferent, right? Things like that. That is a hurdle that I just was like, wow, that's a thing.
Thank you for sharing that, Taylor. And part of tonight too is I just invite us all to try to hold space for one another, because it's not our attempt to try to have an answer for kind of what comes forward. Hopefully people are able to then, even from what Taylor is sharing and some of the comments that came in through the chat, is to recognize that there may just be a lot that we're all trying to learn, wrestle with, and understand in the context of how did we get here? Why are we still here? And all the work that is necessary to unravel and to create a new paradigm, dare we say, around the development that we want to see in our community. So again, thank you, Taylor. If anyone else wants to share what's coming up for them, you certainly are invited to do so. I believe that I've shared, you can see the polling results on your screen. And again, a lot of symmetry, maybe alignment in our group, because nearly, again, 50%, not quite, believe that structural disparities when it comes to within our social, our economic, and our environmental and health systems, and certainly so many other systems, is the leading or the biggest contributing factor to why the hurdles kind of continue to influence equitable development, or our ability maybe to achieve equitable development. Distribution of power received the next highest at 26%. And then after that was distribution of resources. And lastly, people belief systems. So again, if anyone has anything else that they would want to share about that idea in terms of hurdles in our community, personal and or systematic, that could lead to how we experience equitable or don't experience equitable development, please feel free to share.
I will say that I feel like all of these kind of flow into one another. So, I mean, I did the one that got 43%, and I was also in the other group that got 50%, but like the next highest, the second, and then the third literally is encapsulated in the first one. So, I mean, it's all kind of pointing back to some deep-rooted structural, like you can't win a race that you started way after it has already started. So I think that's a more fundamental problem. But I was just going to illuminate, you know, for me, myself, I've worked with many of Black contractors, Black young developers who have tried to participate in the City of Minneapolis vacant lot program all over the city in North Minneapolis. And what I always find is we cannot get access to, hold on real quick, kids, please, seriously. We cannot get access to doing a project because there's always a limiting factor, okay? And it's crazy. The person at the city who's in charge of that program is Matthew Ramadan. He's a Black man, he works in CPED. I've talked to him numerous times. I've watched people who, hey, I'm a contractor, I wanna go build a house, or hey, I wanna go do this and build a house to try to do something. And just to get access to even do something, the hurdle always is we don't have access to the amount of capital to get a construction loan or something like that, or there's all these hurdles in the way. And I feel like I know a little bit about the design process. I've designed things that have been permitted before, but we always get held up on the logistics end. And I think, you know, regardless of how hard we try, or even inside people we may know, or even understanding of a certain process, it just hits up against a certain wall that unless we have like somebody just writing checks for us, it's not gonna happen. So I do think all of your polls kind of flow into each other from my own experience.
Thank you, Sam, for sharing that. And if everybody stays with us till 8:30, Paul will be writing checks. So that could be partially a path to get us to where we want to be. He didn't know that, but now he know. Start with mine, Paul. Start with mine. But seriously, you know what? The thing that that came up for me, Sam, when you were sharing, is even in the description that you described in terms of just like the hurdle of here's this program, here's a lot of people that you are trying to use the program as designed, but how you teed it up is like, it's hard to win a race that has already started, right? And that a race that is in some ways feels predetermined for you not to really have been at the starting line to begin with. And so I think that that's not trying to be a discouragement, because it in some ways hopefully flows into the next part or next movement of our conversation is, well, where does the hope come from? Which sometimes might be, how do we as a community of partners work together to potentially change the race and how we define the race that we're willing to run in service of the communities that we want. And again, understanding that that's certainly easier said than done for so many of the reasons that have already come up. And as a qualifier, the poll certainly sometimes in this context is meant and was written to have us to make a choice, but not because it is agnostic of the truth that you just shared, Sam, which is it's all so interrelated and connected and they flow into one another. And it's really not about which one has had the biggest impact, but just sometimes what Paul said is, how do we start conversations? How do we center conversations? If we're talking about inequities and development and we never start the conversations generally with, as an example, the genocide of Native Americans and or slavery, then again, it becomes one of those things that we're still so much focused on the race or the hand that we've been dealt. But Gretchen, go for it. And please, no one, this is a safe space. Just start talking, because that will cut me off very quickly.
Not that we want that, Tabitha, but I just wanted to share just a little bit of our experiences with our Developers of Color program. It has been really an amazing lens to experience this work. Not that we're walking in anybody's shoes, but Jamez is on the call. You know, we just get to understand what's going on as these developers are walking projects through the process. And it is quite astounding. So our ability to kind of experience or observe, make observations about some of these circumstances and systems players, and our ability to document that and hold mirrors up to ourselves as, you know, the agencies and organizations that oversee those systems. I think it's a really impactful way to understand what's really happening in real time. So I just wanted to, you know, offer this, if we can find opportunities to help others in, you know, that to see what people are going through helps a lot to get them to understand the challenges of this work.
Thank you so much, Gretchen.
I guess I just want to add to the comment that I made. I am not a developer, by the way, but I do know my friend Christopher. He's a developer over in North Minneapolis, and he actually is the director of New Rules, and is starting a lot of amazing projects in the community. But I remember about like 4 or 5 months ago, or maybe even a little bit longer than that, like 6 months, he was sharing with me, very frustrated, about getting just through the paperwork, everything. He was closed, or he was about to break ground, and he just needed some regulatory paperwork that he needed approved. He did everything, he answered, everything was perfect. And then the woman that he was working with said, no, we can't take it, there's something missing or whatever, And he told me, he said, oh my God, this is why I have a white person do these calls and, you know, make these phone calls, because I don't know why she's always has a problem, and why can't she just go to me and tell me this is what I need instead of saying you're missing something, you know? So that I could just share that experience from my friend, who I will invite to join us. Hopefully he can make it, but it's just that personal experience that I knew. That's it.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing.
I would love to piggyback off of her comment as a planner in that department. That is very, very 100% true. There's many times that because I'm one of the few planners of color in the department, I don't even work in zoning. I'm in long range planning or community planning as we're called now, but I will get Chris Weber, I will get Houston White calling me saying, hey, I'm having trouble with such and such in this area. Can you talk to them? And I'll have to talk to them. And no one ever says it's because of color or because of lack of experience. People just, I guess, have their people that they're fond of that go through quicker. But inside, we kind of all know, and we try to get people through the system. But that's if you know who to talk to within that system. So, yeah, unfortunately, I have to verify that she's correct in saying that.
Thank you, Breon. And I'm just going to name that I think it's fortunate and maybe unfortunate. Like it can be both, because this is intended to be a learning space, right? The hope is that we can create an accelerant path to what we understand to be the real areas of need and opportunity, and how we try to advance equitable development in our communities. And it will take us wrestling with some of the stuff that we don't always talk about, that is a little bit uncomfortable, that doesn't even have a name. And people, the truth of it is, and I think that the history and the hurdles of systems and policies, institutions, disparities makes what we just described through you and Daniela and your personal experiences and experiences with developers of color salient, in that all of the things that we are fully aware of that has happened, or sometimes that we forget, has an impact. People aren't often comfortable with things being turned in and submitted a certain way, an application reading a particular way, things being turned in or even scanned or passed along in a particular fashion, because that's their workflow. There is something to that. And there is any number of history in our country of things that people of color just did not have, and still to this day don't always have all the access and experience with, because of the distribution of power, distribution of resources. So I think that that's me saying we've named that, and learning from what we've named is always okay, and trying to figure out now that we are having this same understanding, what and how can that influence our next steps and decisions that we can collectively make. Okay, I'm going to turn it back over to Paul to move us into our hope segment.
All right, thank you, Tabitha. You must know about more money than I know about, so I don't know who you're talking to. So that was a really good discussion, and I cut my teeth on doing affordable housing, and I've been working in the community North Minneapolis for a long time. And so all of the things that I heard you guys say, I've seen, experienced, and as bad as it may seem now, and I'm always a guy, glass half full, it's better than it was when I used to have to argue about, are we going to put closet doors in affordable housing on closets? And that was real. And that was things that would go on, because those people would not take care of the closet doors, Paul. So why would you put those doors on that we're just going to have to get rid of? And Gretchen's looking at me like, really? I'm like, yes, really. Right. So, wow. So for me, hope, is like, one is, we have to continue to have these discussions, and all of you have to continue to have these discussions, and you know, as Tabitha just said, you know, to continue to push. What I'm going to talk about is some examples of work that's going on, and where I see hope is I look for systems and projects and things that are going on that are making change, and that I can point to and say, hey, why don't we do that? You know, when I'm in the room with people at CPED or wherever, I could say, hey, this is going on in Portland, or this is going on wherever. You know, we could do the same thing. And I'm going to talk about capital. You know, Sam, you talked about, you know, access to capital, who has capital. I'm going to talk about capital. I'm going to talk about, you know, how some people are doing work that is equitable, that is producing wealth in community through community investment. And I'm going to talk about the need for all of us to challenge, you know, these systems and policies that are in place. And also some people who are doing that work who can help us. So the first place I'm gonna go, I'm kind of changing my thoughts, is to an organization called the Inclusive Capital Collective. It is a group of African-American real estate professionals whose sole job in life is shifting the power in capital and real estate finance. And the ICC is an organization that is producing a series of what they call black papers that they put out that illustrates ways to do this work. And this one I'm going to go over has got 4 case studies. One's in Philly, one's in Chicago, one's in Atlanta, and one's in Southwest Florida. I'm just going to be brief, but the reason that I picked them is because, one, it's rare that we see, first of all, it's rare that we see a collective of African-American real estate developers. Most of the time what we see, particularly working at larger scale, most of the time what we see is either smaller work, or if it's really big scale, partnered with white organizations, which a lot of times gets into a whole nother reality of who's in charge, what can you do, what can't you do, etc. So the first one is called Philly Rise, and it's from the Black Squirrel Collective, and it's around redeveloping vacant properties in Philadelphia. And I know we think we have a lot of vacant properties in Minneapolis and North Minneapolis, but we have hardly any compared to cities like Philly or New York. And so this is a group that is working on redeveloping these properties through a collective impact model, and through engaging people in the community to do the work, to benefit, and to build equity. The next one is the Chicago Trend Corporation, which is all about acquiring shopping centers in communities of color, and redeveloping them and creating jobs, opportunity, equity, and ownership. The next one is the Guild, and that's in Atlanta. And that's a community stewardship trust, which is how residents invest in and acquire properties. And I'm big on people being part of the ownership structures, because if you don't build any capital, any wealth, so when you want to go do a project, Sam, and you're looking for who's going to be an investor or where are you going to get money, most of the time in our community, nobody has any money. So we can't do the friends and family, you know, deal, because friends and family don't have any money. So, you know, we have to, as a community, build wealth so that we could support each other when we want to do these projects. So if you talk to most smaller developers and you ask them, how did you do your first project? Because if they don't have any money, they can't go to the bank either, right? Like, you know, the bank is not equitable, because I just read something that 84% of African-American applicants get denied a mortgage. So the bank is not equitable. However, if you are a developer and you're looking for a loan and you go to the bank and you don't have any equity, any money, it's really hard. It's a lot of developers out the gate, they get money from their family. They help them get there, right? So we have to do that. The other one is Southwest Florida Impact Partners. And this one's really complicated and it was above my pay grade. However, it's an impact fund for the Dunbar, Michigan neighborhoods, which is in Southwest Florida around Fort Myers. And this one was really about how to build equitable capital stacks. So they were really, into how to think about getting money, return on investment, how that's equitable, how people in the community could benefit, and how they could use this kind of fund to do work in the community that would really benefit the community. Because a lot of times, majority developers are looking and going, we don't want to work there. And sometimes it's just the belief that it won't work there, or they won't make money, it's too hard. Okay. Yes, Mary Margaret, I can explain equitable stacks. Thank you. It's the belief that it won't work there, or it's too hard, etc. So a capital stack, if you're doing a real estate project, capital, you have to come up with money. And there's a lot of different ways to do that. Some may be your own money equity. Some way may be money from a bank. Some may be investors, right? Some may be other things like tax credits, right? So you're looking for a way to, how do I put this together in a stack to get to, I have enough money to do the project, okay? If we think about it being equitable, a lot of times the money that's coming in, if we think about banks and let's say investors, coming from outside the community, and who benefits is not the community in the return, right? So if we're trying to think of a more equitable stack, we're trying to figure out ways where, the community is going to get more return, and that's real money, and that the results are creating something that also is more beneficial. So that's more of an equity stack. If you're doing affordable housing, what we used to say is, we have the garbage can approach. We'd have 12, 14 sources, which was always fun to work through, and all those fun conflicting regulations. So I think seeing that kind of work, which is new, but the fact that these folks have the ability, the access, the tenacity, the hope that they can go out and make a difference here, and things that you could point to. A lot of times when we're in the room and we're saying we want to do this differently, people say, oh, well, we don't know how to do that. Or you can't do that because we don't know how, Paul. And so, I always like to have 4 or 5 of these in my pocket to say, well, look, here's one. Another one is in Portland, Oregon, called Mercy Corps. And that's a community investment trust. And that is around the same idea. I acquire property. This one is an existing shopping center. It's about 28,000 square feet. It was, one of those ones that wasn't working, half empty, et cetera, et cetera. But, they acquired it, they redeveloped it. 54% of the investors in it. And so you can invest in it as a community member, anywhere from like 10 to $100. 54% of the investors in it make less than $40,000 a year. They have over 250 investors already, and the average dividend is 9.3%. So this is about how do we use the existing capitalist systems that are in place, but to make them work for people who haven't benefited from the existing capitalist systems, right? Because, those systems we need to democratize, but they're not going to go away. Right? We're not going to change all of a sudden, in America to like, oh, no, we don't do that. The other one is NICO, Neighborhood Investment Company. This one's focused on housing. It's in Los Angeles. Like a lot of parts of the country, there's incredible pressure in Los Angeles on housing, affordable housing, the impact on renters, and how do they stay in their housing, the pressure for rents to go up, or for owners of these rental properties to convert them into much higher income properties. So NICO is really about acquiring housing in the, where is this? It's in the Echo Park neighborhood in LA, acquiring this housing and developing it so that, folks in the neighborhood can stay in it. Pretty much the same idea as Mercy Corps. You can invest in it. You can start at $100. They've purchased 3 large rental properties to date. And, you know, so they're stabilizing their community. They're keeping people who have been in the community there. They're allowing people to build some equity, which I think is really important. And they're introducing people, because most of us, you know, Black people, brown people, whatever, no one sat around the table explaining to us, okay, this is how you invest in a housing project. This is how you get equity. This is how the stock market works, right? Nobody told you, you didn't learn that at home, right? So, and this is about, okay, understanding, you know, how that works and being able to participate, which, you know, part of systems change is being, you know, there are people who have to push on the system from the outside. There are people who have to be inside the system doing it and understanding it, right? So you need both, you know, in order to make that. So the fact that those things are going on, you know, give me hope that we can do that. Things that I see going on here, Gretchen mentioned their program, and just there's an overall tenor, and this is because I'm such a wonk. There's an overall tenor that people are like, we're not just going to talk about this. We have to figure out how to make this work, right? And so we're having these discussions. You know, we're here as part of the AIA, who, you know, 10 years ago, we would not have been having this discussion. And it's not that inequity in real estate development just was invented, you know, with George Floyd's, you know, murder. You know, this has been going on forever, you know, and we'll get to the 50s. Some people ask me about it. We'll get to that. I mean, you know, we know that the history of unrest and communities that go through that, whether it's in the 60s, like Newark, Detroit, all that, whether we're talking about LA in 92, we know how long it takes neighborhoods to recover from those kinds of things. There are parts of those neighborhoods that have still not recovered from that unrest, right? And so part of our work and part of the hope and healing is people have to see a change. And it's not just you rebuilt whatever was there, right? That's not just it, because, you know, people weren't in pain because of the building necessarily, right? The pain that, you know, produces the unrest is much deeper. And it's that trauma we talked about. It's all the things. And that culmination, you know, that's rooted in history, that it takes something to set all that off, and then it happens, right? What we most of the time do is we come back and we have some big commission and we get a whole bunch of people and we talk about money and all this stuff, and we build a bunch of stuff, but we never deal with the systems change and the real pain. And so that's why it happens again, because we didn't solve the problem, right? We're not solving the problem. So for me, this work, along with other, you know, activists, people doing this work like Andre Perry, the work Kresge's doing on real estate investment trusts, they're all pushing the agenda, which is really important. But I need all of you have to push the agenda, right? And it's hard, like, yeah, when you're calling in and it's like, oh man, they're not answering my question, or they're making it hard for me, or it's the bureaucracy, you know, and I know that, you know, but like, you just have to keep showing up until they get tired of seeing you and give you what you want. At some point in time, you know, the squeaky wheel gets the grease. So to continue to push and push and push and push and reach out when you need it, you know, who can support you, who can help you. But a lot of times, you know, people are in their silos and they're doing their thing and they're not paying any attention. And they're not realizing how sometimes just by how they operate. And when we talk about bureaucracies, there's always room to do it a little differently. And if someone says, okay, I'm gonna help you, right? And I'm gonna go a little bit left when this says I can only go right, which, you know, you get to the right person, they have that latitude, you can get that done. But, you know, I'm gonna say that we have to lean on each other. We have to know our stuff. You gotta know we have to know our stuff, and we've got to be able to show that there's always another way to do this, and there's a better way to do this. and that we can point to. As much as we want to believe we're the most progressive place on the planet, there are other people doing work that we can go, yep, that works there, right? How do we do it here? Context is everything, so we might have to tweak it for Minneapolis, St. Paul, but foundationally, this kind of work that I described, you can do anywhere. You could do anywhere. You just have to have the will to want to do that work.
All right. Thanks, Paul. I'm seeing you taking a sip, so I'm thinking that this is the break where we can transition to the last poll question of the night. Let's give it up. Yeah. I know. No, seriously, we are close, but that is wonderful. And again, you can always drop some of your questions or your thoughts in the chat, which I see many of you have already done. So thank you to that. We will also save the chat down and we can get that out as a part of the notes recaps for each of the nights that we are spending a little bit of time together. So I'm going to go ahead and launch the poll. So just bear with me 1 second.
Well, I want to mention as well that the West Broadway Business Area and Coalition, I'll put it in there, has a trust for businesses over in North Minneapolis, and for people to, to start their own business, and also for people just to create some wealth and savings. And it's a great program, the West Broadway Business and Area Coalition. I'll put their link in the chat.
Thanks so much, Gladys. So we have our last poll of the night open. So this is just trying to get thoughts on what do we think can be a leading accelerant to equitable development, thinking about some of the things that I think people have dropped into the chat that Paul certainly shared in terms of some of the case studies that he's lifted up from across the country. Maybe your own experience, work projects and initiatives that you're engaged in or working on, or things that you just belief systems that you have in terms of what do you think could really move the needle as we're here. And I would encourage us all to think that any number of things are possible, even if they feel like some of the things that are on this list could take, for some of us, what feels like a lifetime, right? But it really is more rooted in what do we think would be the accelerant to some of the things that have come up in tonight's conversation. So I'm going to give us, again, maybe just take 20, not even 20 more seconds, maybe 10 more seconds to finish the poll if you're able, and then we will share the results. And again, continuing to invite your voices into this space, which I think is the most important part of these workshops. The workshop series is really about understanding from our point of view that you guys are what we would call tier 1 stakeholders in a variety of ways and for different reasons, and having helping us to reach a common, maybe even if it's not shared, a common or aligned point of view on some of the things that could help increase equitable development in our community, so that we can take the next steps of, as Mary Margaret laid out earlier, of sharing that with community members for more input, for us to get to a place where we can have a rallying cry around what we need here in the Twin Cities for the health of our communities when it comes to a physical and community development perspective. So thank you all for those who were able to get your responses in. And here again, we still have, in many instances, something that took the lead in terms of 7%, near a third of people believe that reparations for Black, Indigenous, and people of color would be an accelerant. A close second, redistribution of wealth in this country, and then followed by everything else kind of being in a tied position. So zoning and development policies that center equity, transition away from modern capitalism, and then local and national cooperative development infrastructure. That's a mouthful, but that basically is to say that many of the case studies that Paul just shared with us, do we believe that we have the local and national infrastructure to help accelerate our cooperative collaboration in terms of investment and development in our communities? All of the studies would suggest that we don't, that there's good work happening, but that there is not enough support to sometimes accelerate or enable those types of transactions. So I'm going to pause there before I say anything else to see if anyone wants to add their voice to the space. What's coming up for you tonight when it comes to things that you think could be hopeful in terms of policies, practices, approaches, initiatives when it comes to furthering equitable development?
First off, I want to say thank you, Paul, for all of the knowledge that you've given us today. There's some stuff, you know, that like some of us knew. There's tons of perspective that like absolutely I would not have had it if not for having been here today. So thank you very much for that. I'm thinking about hurdles into hope. I've certainly heard both in the chat and certainly before today that among the more difficult hurdles is, you know, like the paperwork end of things, which sort of, you know, there's two ways to come about that as I transition to sort of like the hope side of it. Is the one side is either you can simplify the paperwork, and then the other side of it is the education for like meeting those hurdles, right? So like you can either make the hurdle shorter, or you can give people some stilts, right? Like, and I think from my perspective, it seems like we kind of got to do a little bit of both, right? And because as you said, Paul, in a lot of households, you just don't get taught at home, here is what investing looks like. Here is how you pull a permit. Here is how, you know, you go to the city with all these paperwork. And even if they're capable of doing it, and maybe all the information for this is like online and you can look it up, it feels big, right? Like it feels like this is a huge weight that I got to lift to get it over to do the thing. And just that weight and knowing that that's the thing that they're going to have to get past, that could be enough of a barrier that they're like, this is not a space that I want to get into. I don't want to go down this path. And now that I found out that this is what's required if I'm going to open a storefront, you know, just over here on Broadway, then like, I don't know that I can do that. I don't know that that's a thing I'm capable of doing, because going through and getting all the permits for that, and I got to do this water stuff, and what's this other thing I got to figure out just so I can like sell clothes. I'm, you know, and so I don't know that anyone is here today, and if there is, I'm glad that you're here, that can necessarily address the simplifying the paperwork end of it, but maybe like finding ways to help other people meet, you know, bring it to the other side, right? Like the giving folks stilts to be able to get over those hurdles easier, as far as like the paperworky end of things. I'd like to think that some of us here can do some of that. I don't know how yet, but sort of like naming the beast before we, you know, grab our sword to try and slay it.
Well, in the spirit of slaying beasts, we appreciate that, Louise. So just wanted to offer that appreciation. Gladys, I see that you had a comment, and then I'm going to ask Russ if you would just give some thought to maybe if you want to share a little bit more about the comment that you placed in the chat, because I thought it was really a good one, if you wouldn't mind, if you're comfortable. So Gladys, and then Russ, if you're able or willing, and then we'll keep going.
Yeah, Louis, we just picking back from what you're saying, is that I have found that many people don't like to share how they found out this information. I understand that these professionals know that answer, and that's why they get paid to give advice and all that stuff. But I feel like we should empower those in our community to share, make a video and post it online and do those things that don't have a sticker price, stuck to that. Sharing information is something that we should just do because we care, not because we should get paid for it. You know what I mean? Well, yes, we should get paid period. But I have found that with money and just access to knowledge, and it's just difficult to get that, without paying someone to do it.
Thank you, Gladys. Russ?
Yeah, and I see there's a hand raised as well, so someone might want to go after me. I love the examples that Paul gave. I was familiar with the Portland, Oregon one. I'm glad to hear that it's still being raised. It strikes me that many of those models embrace capitalism, right, as an approach, but is trying to twist it or pivot in a way that clears away some of the baggage of modern capitalism. So, I like the choices in that hope poll, and I picked the one that said, get away from modern capitalism. I could have picked several others. And it seems to me that the best approaches are going to have combinations of those things. And I think Paul's examples probably do. Like, if you were to break those down and really examine them, you'd find that they touch on a lot of those are like touchstones, I guess. And the other thing that's on my mind, working at the Lake Street Council, and I live in Powderhorn Park, just a few blocks off of Lake Street, is that we're working with BIPOC business owners who are struggling. They were struggling during the economic downturn caused by the pandemic. They're struggling by pandemic restrictions. They're struggling with public perceptions of, is it safe for me to shop on Lake Street? They're struggling with racism. They're struggling with police. They're struggling with so many different things, and some of them lost their buildings, or the building that they did business in burnt down or was damaged, right? So they're capitalists, they're entrepreneurs, and they have unbelievable levels of energy and resilience. But of course, there's limit, right? And how do we make it easier for them? So, and I'll end the comment with this. So there's a lot of interesting projects now that are thinking about, instead of just creating new commercial retail space, can we create commercial condos so that the business person who's going to put their business in that building can buy a piece of the building and build equity and create wealth. And it's a intentional approach. Now, is it a standard policy at the city of Minneapolis that would require that in new developments? No. Do we require multiple stories along commercial corridors and transit ways as a matter of policy and zoning? Yes, right? So you just have to write the rules, or you just have to find ways to make it easier. And then the final thing I would say is we have to pay attention to things that you might characterize as market failure. Developers and real estate folks will tell you, don't put the onus on us to deliver affordable housing. We need a public subsidy. We cannot deliver in terms of material costs, labor costs, land costs, making a profit to our investors. We cannot deliver a product at every price point that people need. We need public subsidy. And generally, Republicans and Democrats have accepted that. They really have. That's not even a debate that much anymore. Unfortunately, we're starting to see that on Lake Street, where combinations of land prices and or just what landowners are asking because they think they can extort a higher price from folks who want to do something good with a vacant lot, is going to make new developments extremely unaffordable for retail commercial space. That is a form of market failure, and I've heard more than one person say we need to start thinking about public subsidization of commercial retail properties in the same way we do housing. And unfortunately, that's a gentrification impact, but we're going to have to figure out a way to deliver this in that's more accessible for folks.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Russ, for sharing and being willing to share. Shanae, if you want to go ahead and share your thoughts.
Yes, thank you. And thank you for the information. I'm listening. And as I'm listening, I'm thinking about some of the hurdles, and what you listed was accurate. But I think that there's a missing piece that keeps on coming up for me as people are speaking, is around like the education piece, right? And Gladys mentioned like that info hoarding, right? That information hoarding. Like, how do you know these things if it isn't for your family, your formal education, or your network, right? How do you get into this field? And it's lacking, right? For people of color, people from my community, and even youth, right? After the murder of George Floyd, my hope was, as people were throwing all of this money out there, that there would have been a little space carved out for the brilliance, the collective brilliance of young people. But instead, elders, kind of the same characters that have been around forever, has taken the money and use it for whatever their benefit is, to continue to build their network and net worth, as opposed to investing in the young people. And that continues to show up where like token Black folks are picked, right? And they're at all the tables because of maybe their availability, or I wouldn't even diminish their drive, right? And their knowledge or their network. I don't want to diminish that, but it's important that we see all the people that are not at the table, right? And recognize that they're not there for a reason. Most of the time it is access to the education, or feeling uncomfortable by the systems or the application or the forms, as if there aren't other ways to learn and grow. And I want to continue to underscore, there is brilliance out there. There shouldn't be a reason why we have 1,500 chicken spots on Broadway, right? And interweaved is liquor stores and corner stores, right? There's young people all the time that have brilliant ideas that are stamped out through the education system, and these are the things that will build them wealth, but they're not here, right? So I just wanted to say that, right? It starts early. I don't know how old you are on this call, but like, there isn't a reason why young people shouldn't be here. To have these conversations, to be included in these conversations in a meaningful way that will support their brilliant ideas that they already have. It's inherent.
Thank you, Shanae. And totally agree. I think that one of the things, and not to gloss over it, how do we figure out at every turn, how do we create access? How do we not duplicate or model behaviors where we are indirectly, inadvertently creating a lack of access? Because that's one of the underlying through lines here that's coming up, just in terms of development and the access to it and who can do it, inclusive of, and not as a side note, but because of the vision of young people can contribute to that. So
if I could, Tabitha,
yes, please, Sam.
I can say, I think it was Shanae who was just speaking, right?
Yes, Shanae. Yep.
Shanae, yeah. So I don't know. I think so I'm 38, which is that young old age, right? So I'm not a young person, but you know, I walk into my office and I get, you know, considered, I'm talking about my like kids running around and they're like, oh, my kids are in college and they don't even want to talk to me anymore. So like, I feel young, but as somebody who has done a lot of community engagement, what I found is this time is extremely hard to really engage people, just period. So my kid is doing remote school, or my kids are both, well, one of my kids is able to go to school in person, one kid's doing remote school, and they're pretty tapped. In my day job, I work at LSE Architects, and I'm working on North High School. I'm a Polar class of 2001. I went into North High School to talk to them with boards. Hey, we're working on your school. You can pick out what the feature stair wall is going to be, and you know, we have different finishes and this and that and whatever. And then I'm talking with the community liaison, and he's like, yeah, we have a student body of a little over 400 students, and we have about 200 students that are out because of COVID. We're staffing shortage, whatever. People are just like very checked out. Like, I've been doing a lot of community engagement throughout the pandemic, and people are just like, I think age appropriate engagement is also worthwhile, because a lot of times if you get people to ask questions that is above their developmental stage, like I think the folks that need to be at the table are folks that are, you know, millennials. I'll say I'm a millennial myself. I'm one of the older millennials, but like I was born in '83. So like we're starting to have kids, buy houses, get into things, want to start our own businesses. And I feel like those are the people who are exactly cut out of certain opportunities. You know, I think people a generation before me, the Gen Xers, had graduated with less student debt, bought homes at a better time were able to do that. And then before them, you had the boomers. So it's like, I feel like it's our generation, younger folks, and to me, would mean millennials. Because when we start talking about some of this, I teach a class at the U of M, and I'm going to talk to a bunch of, 20 somethings, and they're going to have some glossed over eyes. And this is in their major. This is an urban studies class. So I always take some of these things with a grain of salt with like, how do you actively, meaningfully engage folks? And then, so I've been thinking about that with my own work. And then, when I work in nonprofits, when I do stuff with Juxta and I talk about the light rail coming through in North Minneapolis, or the Upper Harbor Terminal over there, or I'm going to put up a mural with a friend of mine about public safety on the Hub Bike Shop. And, we're talking about like, how do resources get spent? What makes you feel safe? And like, I find the folks who, in my opinion, who helped keep this neighborhood safe were folks around my age, like, yo, my kids are sleeping here. You're not going to burn through my neighborhood. We took turns. We did the watch. We did all that stuff. And yeah, like my friend group, my peer group, were, buying homes, renovating spots, making it work, borrowing tools to each other. Hey, do you know a contractor? Hey, my friend down the block does tile work, so that we share that type of info. And I feel like I am what I would consider a young person who should be in this conversation. And that's weird, I'm 38, but like, I'm the type of young person who I think should be doing this work. Because I feel like I'm 38 and I've already gone through my second recession, Like I graduated in 2009 and sat on the bench for 6 months. Like that was not fun, so I'm happy I'm not in that position now, but I'm thinking about the folks who are in college now, looking at the state of the world, wondering what are their job prospects, what is their contribution going to be. I'd say, I don't know, maybe 25 and up would be like the target demographic. Because if you're in high school right now, you're just wondering, can you graduate? Can you walk? Can you have a ceremony?
Thank you, Sam. And I just want to give Shanae, your hand is still up, but is that because you just haven't lowered it, or did you have an additional comment?
I don't, I will just say, it does exist, and I'll leave it there. So I will put my hand down.
Okay, appreciate that. One of the things what is beautiful about that, right, guys, and here, let me be clear. We are not trying to force consensus. Every person's contribution is beautiful, powerful, and right for the experiences that you possess. We are not trying to solve all of the things and figure out all of the approaches. We are coming together, but because we believe, I firmly believe wholeheartedly that this is one of the steps, one of the paths that we need to walk out together in service of getting to a different outcome, right, in our communities. And it will include some of the things that we've lifted up tonight, and it won't include others. And I also just believe personally that whether there is a disability, whether it's age, the truth of life is every single person can engage in everything that has meaning with the right customization. And that's just because life is not a one size fits all. And we generally don't always crack the code on how to figure out how to customize the right experience in order to really benefit from the lens, the voice, or the experience, right? And that's not to say that's because we will figure it out, but I believe in the possibility of that being real. So here's where we're at. We are going to do our level best in that. When I say we, I'm going to say me, and then encourage Paul and Mary Margaret and everyone in the space to kind of share in this idea of what are the key themes that we were able to cover tonight. And then Paul is going to launch into where we're going to go on Thursday, because of course there's 2 more days of us being together in a similar setting and session. And then from there, we will think through how we might be able to give you 10 whole minutes of your night back, or we can wait for Paul to cut our checks, which is what I'm signing up for. So here we go. So one of the big themes, and I'm going to try to do this in chunks to the best of my ability. So, right, and and Mary Margaret, at some point, please chime in and give credit to where credit is due in terms of who came up with the title of this workshop, because I think History, Hurdles, and Hope is so powerful and rich for so many reasons. But where we started tonight was with the history. And the thing that really sticks with me in terms of, well, what was that whole movement about? Why did we spend so much time on that? Is to just name that history matters, and it does not do us any good. It does not serve us when we gloss over some of the things that I know that we all either remember learning in part or in total about how this land was stolen, and the people who were stolen to it, and people who were removed through violence from it in order to support our modern capitalistic system. And there were a lot of different points in history that were thrown out in the chat that Paul certainly lifted up. And that is an encouragement for all of us not to use history as something that just happened, but to think about history as something that we should continually revisit in order to learn from, so that that shapes our thinking and our actions in our present, is one of the themes that kind of we took on tonight, that we did our best to take on. And then from there, we moved on over to hurdles. And that was such a rich conversation, because I think that that's where a lot of some of you as attendees and partners in this work really came alive, and naming some of the hurdles that we face when it comes to wanting to birth a new era, a new age, of equitable development. And a lot of that kind of really began to point to the existing institutions and systems, and the people who work within those institutions and systems that continue to see development, and those who should be developing a particular way, So if we currently, I think the stat that Paul threw out, are one of many, that we haven't really moved the needle in terms of just over 1% of Black folks in this country owning land. And when people go to develop land, that they could be met with not the type of support, understanding, curiosity about their projects at a municipal level, and or at a funding level from a capital stack or equity stack, which Paul laid out, that continues to perpetuate the hurdle itself. So really thinking through hurdles as not only processes and policies and procedures, but the people who are tied to those policies and processes and procedures that we come up against in community. And so that was kind of like the second movement in terms of hurdles that continues to maybe take us off course from what we want to see. And then the hope, which one of the things that really sticks with me is this idea of new. And not only new in terms of building on collaboration and cooperatives that we're seeing across the country in terms of some of the case studies that Paul named, but really wanting to give credit to what Russ lifted up from the poll in terms of this idea of capitalism can only do so much. It is only going to allow us to go so far. And Sam intimated this when he said, yo, if the race has already started and now you want us all to catch up, and some of us got shoes, some of us don't, some of us got numbers, some of us don't, some of us got people pointing us toward a different path as opposed to the finish line, it all adds up. And so some of that is thinking about our hope is not just in what is. Our hope can be in what we have not yet designed. And that does not mean that we are looking to flip a switch and overnight create a whole new system of existence. But it is to say that we don't have to give up on the idea of that what we need has just not been defined or structured in a way to really meet what we need as a community. So that's kind of what came up for me. And there's a lot of other things that you guys shared. And I want to just let you know that we do have an amazing other planning partners. I think Angie and Christina, who have been taking notes. So we will help to synthesize that over the course of the 3 days and share that out as I think a deeper recap than what I just did. But this was more in the spirit of things that came up from me trying to play the role of listener and recorder and to play back to you and opening up the next few moments here if people have another theme that resonated with you from what was shared from Paul and the attendee comments, so that we can get that captured in the notes as well. Again, the same is true. You can drop it in the chat if that's your preference, or please feel free to come off mute if you would like to share in that way.
I guess I do want to share something, since it kind of seems like I'm 25, so I'm right on the cusp, I guess, of, having connections, I guess, with younger people and older. I want to just comment on Russ's question there, open to knowing other ways of building, and kind of where is the younger individuals, where are they, because they might just be kind of tapped out. As you know, I mean, we've been in cell phones, Instagram, social, the metaverse, all of that. Cryptocurrency is allowing people, BIPOC individuals to be able to create wealth. I understand that cryptocurrency is something that, my dad is like, no, I don't want to talk about that. They're like, that's not real, whatever. Like, why are you talking about that? He's 86. But it's definitely something that I would like to invite someone that daily trades and is Black and also is a homeowner over North Minneapolis. And I love to just have him maybe share some things about how we can share that information, or about how we can create, just understand it, just so we can empower each other as a community, because that's pointing to the decentralizing capitalism, or decentralizing just getting rid of capitalism and just allowing people to democratize money, and it's one of those, Shanae mentioned, one of these things that these young individuals are genius and the brilliant, and have gone ahead just by knowing technology and all that stuff that I don't necessarily, I'm doing my own research myself. So I'd love to bring that person in and kind of just, yes, yeah. And just share that knowledge about where do we invest, like how, if we have $500, like where do we put that money in? That is something that I would love to be a part of and, grow together.
That's wonderful. Thank you so much, Gladys. And the thing about it is, what I think we can commit to tonight is continuing to learn from each other. And figuring out what that looks like may take a lot of different forms. So maybe last call for if someone wants to comment on what came up for you tonight in terms of a key takeaway or theme that you think that our workshop or day one within our workshop series in terms of what came up for you.
Hi, Kim here. I can't say that necessarily came up, from a group standpoint, but something that was just sitting with me is, as we talk about hurdles and all of the things we have to work through, and the history that you shared. So thank you so much for all of that, Paul, because it's helpful even just to be reminded, even if you do work in this space, right, of really what we're up against. But one of the things, for some reason, somebody said something that made me think of, I used to work literally for a billionaire. And I think of people, you kind of only see these things on TV. If people watch like shows like Succession or something like that, where there are people, whether you know them or not, or somebody just, so you see it on TV or you think it's on the character, that like truly believe anything is possible. And it just kind of reminded me of like, hey, the next one of these that I come into, I want to make sure I get myself in this headspace, is what I'm sharing with all of you, of your own choice, but like that, like, and absolutely anything is possible. And like, there are no roadblocks, like we can take care of them, because this particular individual, like, and that's just like the way that everybody thought, like there is no there really aren't much in the way. I mean, there are small hurdles, but you know, we can get through them. And I know we're talking about really big hurdles, but you know, with creativity, with pressure, with all those things. So that's just one of the things I'm kind of walking away with. I'm like, huh, I think about Steve, and like Steve will like, yeah, I got that, you know. And like, at what point do we get to that place where we're like, yes, we've got this. It's not that easy, but like, you have to have that mindset, otherwise it's hard. I mean, and I know I'm tired. Like, people talk about pandemic or COVID positive house over here right now, so I'm ready for a nap. So that was it. Thank you.
Thanks, Kim. You're getting a lot of love in the chat for those comments, just in terms of the mindset that we bring into this space. So much gratitude for you teeing that up to give us some food for thought for not only this coming Thursday, but Monday. I do know who came up with the title of this workshop series that I'm grateful to be a part of, which was Mary Margaret. So shout out to our Mary Margaret, because I really do think it's appropriate. There's a lot of history here. There's certainly hurdles. They're undeniable, and things about how our experience, our lived experience, not only ours, but our ancestors, continue to demonstrate and prove that it also affects our truth, is powerful. So sometimes just being reminded of all of these things might give the illusion that we can't do what Kim just said, is to choose a mindset of that anything is possible, which I think is truly a kissing cousin to hope. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Paul, and he's going to help us to understand where we're going from here. And then that will really bring us to the end of tonight. Thank you all.
Thank you, Tabitha, and thanks everybody for a great conversation. And since I haven't prepared totally for Thursday night, it's great because I'm making some tweaks already. So Thursday, we're going to talk some more history, and we're going to get more into some things people already put out there, 50s redlining. But what I want everybody to think about as we move into this next thing, and Russ touched on this when he was talking about subsidies and private developers saying, you know, we can't do commercial, we can't make this work. I want everybody to think about that. We're going to go into a history and talk about an era where the United States government created the middle class in America. So when we think about how we got to home ownership, all of the things that people take for granted, it's not because the capitalist system was designed that way. After World War II, the government decided, hey, we're going to make this happen. So we can't leave that out as we think about how we continue to do this work and the responsibility. And as Kim said, you know, we can do anything because, you know, we have to remember we're the government, you know, they do work for us. So we're gonna talk about that and some things from a book that I have that I love that's called When Affirmative Action Was White. So we're gonna get into that. You get to see my, as my wife calls me, you know, my book nerd side. So we're gonna do that, and today some work that's from some really talented, incredible young people that I've just been reading about related to the built environment and development. And it's not in Minneapolis, but it's in Richmond, California. But I think you'll be impressed in this work. So those are the things we're gonna do as I think about it. And that's it.
That sounds great, Paul.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everyone, for joining us. We'll see you on Thursday.